Hey team, just finished a book. Wanted to make a quick book club video. I just read 100 Years of Solitude, and it's a classic. It is um, it is the story of a family who moved to a place in South America, I believe, called Macondo, and they kind of established it and grew it up from nothing, from the roots. And it starts with a woman and a man, and they are distant relatives. It's very symbolic because it was like the uniting of the Aboriginal people with the Spanish. I think that is what it said, and but they were distant relatives, and so it was suggested that they shouldn't be together because of that heritage. They might have children that have the tails of a pig, or that they would be little iguanas if they had kids. And but they did get together. They had children, and they were fine. And it kind of walked through the lives of the children and maintained the lives of the parents as well. Um, and the parents were long lived, longer than many of the children, unfortunately. It went over the story of the children, and then it went over the children's children, and it was a big family, so it had a lot of different members to it. And they actually kind of brought in a woman as well into the family named Rebecca, and she was a unique character as well. It was not a happy story. It wasn't a happy story. There were a lot of very perverse relationships, a lot of sexual tensions amongst family members that you don't really see in modern literature and modern society, because we know that that's inappropriate and it's wrong. It's inbreeding, and it can cause health defects and things like that. So it was, I did say, I'm not sure I am actually evolved enough for this one. I don't know. I have heard of cultures where they might like role play as family members, and so that would make it a little more okay, if people were role playing as these characters and they had these sexual tensions, because then they might not actually genuinely be related. But it was unique, like with aunts, with brothers, with sisters who end up being aunts, with frustrations with wanting mothers and fathers. And it was intricate. Very, I like I said, I wasn't sure I was cultured enough to fully appreciate that element of it. Um, the sexual tension, of the chemistry of actually being family. I suppose having that intimacy just implied, um, is you don't, actual suitors might not actually get to experience that all of the time. And so that could be confusing, and but they are actual family members, and so that's something that they just they just went with in this book. They just went with it, and they enjoyed themselves immensely, it sounds like. Sexually. um, there were kind of social stratifications, um, and the cultural stratifications, not necessarily like economic, but like there was a woman who was raised in the fashion of old, the old manners, the old ways, very religious, devout, following the letter of the law, the religious law to a T. And she was gorgeous. She looked to be royalty. She was a queen, and she married into this family, but she didn't want to. She wanted to remain chaste. She didn't want to have sex. Um, Following the religious calendar, and so I think it said that they had 42 days that they got to be together, and so the guy was like, "No, I'm going back to my concubine. I'm going back to my whore," and and so because he had a mistress when he met this woman, and it was these characters I thought were very interesting. They are lovable despite the weird sexual tensions. Once you get over that, like the characters Amaranth and Rebecca. Rebecca ate earth and paint off of the walls when she was feeling fractious, when she was unwell, and so that was kind of her unique character. She came with the bones of her parents, and she had to bury them before she could be married. And then she married the son of the original couple, Ursula, and I believe it was Jose. And Jose, Ursula, and Jose are likable. They are long lasting, and they are very caring. They love the children. And Ursula, tried to kind of break the family curse because none of them were happy. That like the guy who married the queen and had the concubine, they got very, very rich, and he was said to get very, very fat. And then he had a food competition and eating competition with someone called like the elephant or something, and then but something happened and he lost all of that weight. I think he was looking for the gold that someone buried in a statue, and it just a bunch of like weird kind of nuancy stories. They were going to come back after the rains were gone, and so Ursula was always asking. She slowly lost her sight, and she lived to be like 140 plus years old, and so she hid this money from the statue, and this fat guy spent his time looking for it, searching for it, and he lost all of his weight, and he went back to his concubine, and with the loss of the weight, he felt a little lost too, and they lost their sexual appetites, but then they found real love and appreciation for each other. They said that his actual wife kind of became like their child, and they kind of took care of her, doted on her, and he went back to her every once in a while, and they kind of went back and forth, and she really ripped into him a few times. And after all of my breeding and after all of my teachings, and I devoted myself to God, and this is what I get for a husband, this is what I get for a life, and blah 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 blah. And she really wanted her child, I think. Oh no, wait, I can't remember if it was her. She was Ferdinand, I believe. Fernanda. And but that was her name. Ursula was the mother. I can't remember. I think Ursula said, she finally, I thought it was Ursula who said, I have to break this curse of everybody like having a crap life, and because her eldest son hung like a horse, ran away with a gypsy, became a sailor in the the East Indies, and then came back all tattooed, and he was like selling his body to women, for a night, like, so he was whoring himself, and he was saying, "Who wants to fight me?" Because he was big, and they were afraid he was going to have a pig's tail, but he ended up being hung and like a god amongst men. And but then he ended up falling in love madly with Rebecca, who was engaged to this other man, and they had been waiting for so long to be wed, and then all of a sudden she runs off with this guy, and apparently she ends up shooting him in the head, was the story. A long, bloody trail, and but she seems shocked by it, and she ends up being forgotten by the family and just like locked into a house essentially with one servant, and then and so she's forgotten. Eventually they all perish, of course. There was one son, um, Orleano, I believe, and he was a war hero. He just arbitrarily decided that he was not going to be a conservative, he was going to be liberal. And after following, he fell in love with like a very, very young woman who had not yet bled. She hadn't been through puberty, but he said, I want her. So he went and he hooked up with his brother's whore until she was ready, who also ended up being like the grandparents of several of the family members. She's throughout the story, she's there, and so she hooked up with a few of the men, a number of the men, and um, but yeah. So the war hero, he wanted this woman who she was still a child. She had her dolls, and but he wanted her and not any of the other sisters in the family. And then they were married as soon as she hit puberty, and she was so kind and so conscientious, and she took care of the father who was out sitting underneath the tree in the courtyard. um, and the father was really interested in science and silversmithing, and he passed that on to Orleano, and who made little fish, is what it said. And it was but he married young, and he married the young gal. She died, unfortunately, and they did have a child, but I think he actually went off, and then he sired 17. He went into war because he arbitrarily decided, it sounded like he didn't want to be conservative, he wanted to be a liberal. So then he started a revolution, and then he joined the revolutionaries against the government. They had sent, Macondo was established by them, but they had sent people over to govern it kind of without the people's permission, and so that was the start of a conflict. And then there was a revolutionary war, and he apparently lost a number of, he did lose at the end. He was winning left and right and sideways. He was this great war hero, and then he ended up just saying, now we're done, and then that was kind of it. He was renowned. They had a street named after him. He sired 17 sons across various countries, all with different women, and they were all named after him. They ended up baptizing them and giving them all, they all had the mother's last name, I think, and his first name in honor of his being the father. And then, so they're all baptized, they're all recognized, but they were bastards. They upon his death, I think they all came to see him, to or no, maybe it was a celebration of him. He hadn't died yet. I can't remember specifically. It was very dramatic, but they came. They went to the church on, I think it was Ash Wednesday, and they got the cross. And because they were bastards, the cross wouldn't wash off after, so they forever had this ash cross on their foreheads. And so they ended up being targeted by various individuals, and they were all murdered except for one who escaped. And then so he went into hiding because he didn't want to be murdered. But it's just very convoluted, a whole bunch of different nuanced stories of, he would cuddle with his aunt, and and he couldn't be with her, Amaranth, And so he ended up hanging out with the whore, and then eventually, but the aunt was in love with Rebecca's fiance. Rebecca dumped the fiance to be with the son, and so then the fiance courted Amaranth because she was in love with him and she had wanted him, and then it caused strife between her and Rebecca, and then she said, "No, I'm not going to marry you. I'm not going to marry anyone." But she had also been cuddling with like her nephew, and I can't remember, like I think it said that they had cuddled naked, and it's like, whatever. And then and then but her this the I think Pietro, I think was his name, and he was a very, very attractive man. He was like the suitor of Macondo. He was this, he was a great guy, and he was very conscientious and kind. He loved the family. So when Rebecca dumped him, he stayed, and he said he would marry Amaranth. He did love her. She said she wouldn't marry. She was playing hard to get, but she meant it. And then he ended up killing himself, and then she burned her hand in the fire, so she forever wore this black bandage on her hand where she burned herself because she had loved him as well. But she said she would never marry him, and he killed himself. And then, so it went through like a war, it went through colonialism, or well, rather not like, so that, I mean, the war was kind of colonialist, it was a revolutionary war. But then it was also, uh, they had commercialism come in. They had a banana company come down, and so then by that time, they had said, I think it was Fernanda, and who was running the house after Ursula started losing her sight, but she had said, we don't want those people in our home. They are traitors. They infiltrated our culture. And then, so of course, one of the family members started shacking up with one of them, and then um, they were sneaking out and making love, and they got caught. And her father was actually the guy who married Fernanda, and who he was currently staying with his lover, who they actually had a very bountiful crop of animals, agricultural animals, which is why they stayed together, because whenever they were together having sex, making love, they always had a very bountiful farm. And so that's why he was loaded. He was rich because of all these animals, and that's, the bounty of that was the eating and all that stuff. But they were very, very plentiful, and like they would buy champagne just to splash it around and to be showy, and to but he was the father. And so she was caught with a banana factory guy, and he had also worked for her father briefly, and the father thought he was a decent guy. But mom said, no way, no, he's a banana man. He's not gonna be with my daughter. And so they were caught out of the cinema, and so the daughter was like, okay, and she started playing nice, and she was staying home, and she would bathe in the evenings. It turns out he would sneak into the house, and they would make love during her bath time. And so then the mom caught wind, and she told someone, I think someone's coming into the courtyard and stealing our chickens. Can you take care of this criminal? And so he ended up getting shot, I think in his back, and he became paralyzed. And so, and it was linked with yellow butterflies, but he was shot and he became paralyzed. She never forgave herself, and I think they sired a child. She went off to the convent. She never spoke again, and she did have a child. Her dad did not know about it because mom took him. That's right, mom took him and sent him to Europe to join the church because she said, I'm getting these guys out of here. My son is going to be a good boy and he's going to go to church. So all this can just, wash away all this drama. And so he went overseas um, after however long. They did meet, of course, and the father did find out that there was a child of the daughter, but that son came back later at the death of his mother because it went through all the different characters and all the different stories, and they're all very intricate, a lot of them very kind of promiscuous in a sketch way, per normative American modern culture. um, a lot of incest, a lot of it, and um, but but he came back, and there was a gypsy man. The original father of the family was interested in science and the silversmithing, and he met with the gypsies, and he would trade different things, and he like melted all his Ursula's gold into a pot. Um, and trying to like figure out the chemistry of it and trying to separate molecules and things like that, and so he was interested in the science and working with the gypsies who would bring stories of long far off places because they were travelers, and um, so there was this gypsy man who was kind of like a grandfather figure, and he was instrumental. He was, pretty much a part of the family, um, and so he kind of stayed with them every once in a while, and especially he had actually died. He died. They said he died, and then he came back to life. They said he had actually discovered um, immortality. He had discovered how to not die, and then he came back and he lived with a family, and then he kind of died again. But then they left his room open, and it was said the spirit of him remained in that room, and he kept it tidy. It never needed cleaning. And one of the sons went in there and he started reading the transcripts and studying this. He started studying the same sciences, and he kind of lost himself a little bit in that. And um, he started talking to this gypsy man, and then the son that went off to Europe came back, and he started reading the transcripts, and I think, gosh, I can't remember. Was he the one? The last two kids, they ended up, like, the daughter went off to Europe too. A daughter went off to Europe. She ended up getting married to someone named Gaston. They moved back. They were very much in love, very much in love. And then her brother said, I'm in love with you, and I'm so jealous of Gaston. He's a jerk. Be with me. And he kind of started raping her, but she was only feigning her protests. And then they ended up falling in love and having sex like bunnies. And then she told Gaston she wanted to be with her brother. Like, she loved him, but she couldn't bear being apart from her brother. He said, okay, peace out, see ya, I'm gone. And then because he worked with airplanes, and he left. She ended up being with her brother, and they kind of fulfilled this whole big prophecy. And with the last of the line, it turns out she wasn't actually his sister. She was actually his aunt, and their great-grandmother was the whore who had sex with like all of the it felt like almost all the males in the family. And she also lived to be 100 plus years old. And then anyway, the aunt and the son, brother sister combo, had a child, and that child had the tail of a pig. And then that child died and was taken away by the red ants that had constantly been a burden to the house. And that was the end of that was the prophecy. and that was the end of the line. So it was very perverse, very sexual, um, but like everyone had problems. They were all like, it was, there were humorous elements because the characters, they were so real, they were so human. Like, I don't, they're cleaning and they were having people over, and they all had their own characterizations and their own interests, and each character was kind of woven in and out of the plot in so many different ways, and but the perverse ways too. Um, and then you just watch this entire kind of family line going down the line, and you got to see history happen in Macondo, and um, it was very unique. It was very interesting. Um, like I said, I don't know if I'm evolved enough to fully appreciate the incest, but um, it's um, I guess I can see um, that intimacy um, being appealing to those who are not accustomed to intimacy. Um, and in my head, I still kind of, I did end up, after like the first however many chapters, I wanted to stop like a few times in the first couple chapters, and then I was just like, well, let's just, it's culture, it's a classic, we're gonna just watch it, or we're just gonna listen to it. It's also something on Netflix, and so they had abridged it, adapted it for Netflix. It said on the thing, but I haven't seen the show, but um, I'm just imagining like how the sex sells, and so, but like this is kind of, but I mean, they did it too in Game of Thrones with Cersei and her brother, so it's not abnormal, I guess, to even in some popular cultural. I mean, you'll hear about that stuff too in Asian cultures of familial, like love ships and fan fiction. But I guess I never got into it. That's not something that I would normally read. So it was unique. I prefer if it was like more of a role playing, like actually outsiders, um, having these relationships, but feeling the intimacy as if they were actual family. That seems better to me, a little more socially appropriate, versus them actually being related like that. but but it was unique because the characters were like, well, I've also read the Flowers in the Attic series, and that involved a brother and a sister who had an incestual relationship, and like she was a dancer. They grew to love each other because they were both, they had other siblings as well, but they were in the attic, and they were abused, and they were forced to stay in the attic in this huge mansion, and they fell in love. And I read the entire series, and I don't remember most of it, but it's definitely a theme. Um, so that's something to try and decipher. Good luck. But yeah, so it's unique. It is unique. It's windy, windy, windy. Characters are interesting, likable. After you get over the incest and some perversity, a lot of people wanting to run naked through the house, and there was an ephemeral beauty who did perish, and she was apparently dumb as rocks, or she was evolved as all hell. Had a daughter, also this gorgeous, gorgeous beauty, had taken the likeness of her, and oh well. So it was I don't know that there was a point per se, aside from probably don't fuck your family members if you don't want children that have pig's tails. But otherwise, everyone was philandering. They were, they're having whores, and they were living through revolution and commercialism, and having this big mansion, building it up from nothing, and it's encountering strangers and living in this town, Macondo. So this is, I don't know that this would be worth 30 minutes of these random ramblings of the plot, but here it is. I'm gonna stop now. I did finish it. It was very unique, and so like I said, character's likable after you get over the incest, and then it ends with the pig's tail. So there we go. Bye.